Hello, my name is Megan Chitwood, and I am a part of the Language Arts branch of the Distinguished Scholars 21st Century Program. And this is my senior capstone project, titled The Game of Corridors, a Choose-Your-Own-Adventure Experience. First, I will be discussing my inspiration for this project and what problems I am intending to solve throughout this process. When deciding my project, I wanted to go outside of my comfort zone, but I still wanted to stay within the creative writing and storytelling aspect of the language arts program, which is the stuff that I personally enjoy the most. When I was deciding this project, I had a very big recent interest in world building and game design, and I was initially thinking about interning with an indie game developer and seeing kind of the behind the scenes for the story writing for that. But I realized that wasn't super practical, so I decided to go with something else instead. I also wanted to include something interactive because that part of storytelling has always very much interested me. I want to see what happens when other people can give their input into a story, and it makes them even more engaged than they would have been otherwise. Keeping all of this in mind, I eventually narrowed it down to writing a choose-your-own-adventure story. I've always been interested in the concept, but I've never really had a reason to look into it further until now, partially because I just didn't have the resources and I didn't quite know how to look into it further. It's always been interesting to me how the reader could change the story themselves. I personally have never been a fan of rereading stories, but with choose-your-own-adventure stories, you can reread a story as many times as you want because you could get something different every time, which I always thought was super cool. Although one thing I wanted to add was I wanted to add a twist of my own, put my own touch on it, and make it something unique to me. So what exactly is a choose-your-own-adventure story? Well, the choose-your-own-adventure story is exactly what it may sound like. It begins with a single plot line, but throughout the story, the reader is given different choices that may change the story in completely drastic ways, which usually results in multiple endings. Although some choose-your-own-adventure stories do branch out and then converge to a single ending regardless, but it still gives you a taste of that choice that other choose-your-own-adventure stories would have. A choose-your-own-adventure story traditionally come in the form of a book that will tell you to turn to a certain page depending on what your choice is, although they also come in the form of video games, TV shows, role-playing games, and other forms of media. But my twist, however, I was afraid that knowing that the choices would divert the path would influence people so they would make the right choice instead of the choices they actually wanted to make. They would make the choices that they thought would keep them going in the story as opposed to doing this because they were curious to see what would happen, right? So I thought it would be more engaging if the reader didn't know which choices would divert the path or which ones might lead to the same ending in the end, regardless of how the choices seem. Two choices may seem completely different, but they could lead to the same thing in the end. It's just like real life. Which is something that I think is pretty cool about it. But my question that I'm trying to solve is, how do you make a seamless choose-your-own-adventure experience? My solution is to make a digital format where I can use links to navigate the story instead of pages and page numbers. This would offer a nearly seamless transition between choices, because while in a traditional book route, you would see two separate numbers, meaning that you know for a fact that these two choices do not lead to the same thing. But with technology in a digital format, you don't see if the links are different or if they're the same. So you don't know if it's the same thing or if they could potentially come back to one point later in the story. So you don't know which ones diverge and which ones stay the same, which is exactly what I want to explore in my project. So I am going to make a website for my choose-your-own-adventure story. And this is the process before the story, perhaps the most important part. I did
a little bit of research, as one absolutely should do before any project whatsoever. I initially planned to read several choose your own adventure novels so I could get plenty of hands on experience and figure out exactly how all these other authors went about doing it. But I realized very quickly that this was not the best of ideas, especially with my time constraint. My goal was a seamless digital format, which means that novels wouldn't offer much except for consistency. And I would end up having to go with something a little more recent, a little more on the tech side. I decided to watch the Netflix show Black Mirror's Bandersnatch. This show did an incredible job of achieving a seamless choose your own adventure experience, unique to filming, and even inspired me to try other things in my story as well. It also very well accomplished the difference between the right choice versus whatever choice you want to make, or the different choices, because the quote-unquote right choice is the choice that eventually ends up cutting off the path a lot sooner, but the other choices are what pushes the story forward. I researched a lot about the development of the show and read about anything I could about it and realized this would be a lot more difficult than I thought. They talked about months and months of planning, but still, they're doing it on film and they're also professionals, so I was still determined. So now for the writing process of the story itself. So my biggest problem straight out of the gate with planning was my ambition. I tried so many methods of planning the plot, with flowcharts, scattered notes randomly scribbled on Google Docs, more differently formatted flowcharts, but I would always end up getting way over my head. I would make more paths than I could follow, and it was just all over the place. But finally, I decided on a very loose organization and only set a couple rules for it, which ended up working. I made a document and described a path in a few short sentences. Then I would describe how it could divert. 2 paths only, no more and no less. I would then repeat this process for every path until a very loose plot was completed. In the end, I had about 9 chunks of plot, each with 3 to 4 paths each. A couple had more, a couple had less. A few of these paths, though, I knew would be too much for writing in this short period of time, so I set them aside so I could pursue them later if I wanted to pursue this project after the deadline was completed. Then I narrowed it down to about 5 chunks, which is a lot more doable. So I made a separate document for each chunk where I would just simply write, creating a separate page and heading for each new choice. This would make inputting the content into the website significantly easier because it's all organized and nice, and all you have to do is copy and paste. So here's some examples of that process. Up here you can see the outline just for one of the chapters, one of the chunks, as you could call it. We have the first path, and each of the paths have initials, so it would be easier to remember and write down, so I wouldn't have to write out the full name every single time. And then on the other side here, I have the draft itself. I utilized the table of contents feature on Google Docs so that I could have each individual choice written out so I could just jump right to it if I needed to. Although, of course, with any long-term project, there's bound to be a few hiccups. And if I could go back in time and change anything about this project, I'd give myself a lot more writing time. And I would better prepare for writing burnout, too. I got discouraged plenty of times, but I still managed to get back into the swing of things. I managed to stay committed to this thing, and I'm very proud of that. And I knew this project wasn't going to be completely finished when I was going in, but that is intentional. I wanted to continue to explore story possibilities in the years to come after this project. And I don't know if it's ever going to be finished, because yes, there will be endings for every path, but I may still decide to add more later on the line. Still, though, I'm satisfied where the story is, and I know I accomplished the goal that I set out to do. Unfortunately, not everything made it to the final product, but I'd love to pursue a lot of this in the future anyways. For instance, attributes, which are choices that don't affect the story immediately. They affect the story later down the line when you least expect it. And also additional media such as visuals and audio, and secrets such as Easter eggs or secret links hidden within repeating words. But I was still able to include some pretty cool stuff, like puzzles, which are really hard to make, attributes, and there is one that I could add, which I'm very happy with, and repeat endings, which is an ending that goes back in time to a previous point, and then it repeats the story, but all the details are slightly different than the first time, which is really cool if you manage to catch it. And then on to the process of the website itself. It was actually significantly easier than I expected it to be. Not to say it didn't come without its challenges. Initially, I thought I would have to spend a ridiculous amount of time coding every little detail within the website itself, but that's would have been gone awfully. I don't know how to code. But all I ended up doing with the help of my tech genius dad was we purchased the domain, set up the formatting using a website builder, and then we input the content with embedded links leading to the different choices, which were each set up as different pages. And there was a lot of troubleshooting that went on as well, a lot of small, complicated things that ended up happening. Like, for instance, with each page, there was a unique link for it. And because of that unique link and how I organized the website itself, there would sometimes be spoilers in the link, so I had to change most of the links so that they wouldn't give away any unnecessary part of the story, or so that they wouldn't accidentally tell you where the story was going. But it did all work out in the end, so lovely. For instance, right up here, this is the admin's point of view. This is all the kind of stuff I saw. Those are each different individual pages. Those are the titles of the pages. And this is what the reader sees, except for the edit this page. They will see the title, and then they will see the two different choices, which will be outlined in yellow because links. Finally, a reflection on the process. My biggest regret is not having better time management. That was certainly my biggest problem during this entire experience. There's one thing I learned about this, it's that I have a lot of room to grow as a person and as a writer, but I enjoyed the journey and I appreciated it throughout the whole way. It gave me huge amount of insight into self-regulation without any outside influence. I was trusted to create a schedule for myself and then abide to that schedule. And I'd like to say, even though I started a bit rocky, I did manage to complete that in the end. It also gave me a bit of an insight as to what college could be like, which is really helpful because, again, I struggle a lot with time management. Additionally, I'm learning how to regulate myself so I don't get burned out so quickly, so I can stay committed to something that I'm passionate about, which is another thing that I've struggled with in the past. And I think this has been a huge growing opportunity for me, and it's very rewarding to finally have a finished product that I can share with other people. But in the end, I think I grew a lot as a writer. My first few pages certainly weren't as good as the more recent ones, and I've always been bad at dialogue, but I've grown from that. I'm not perfect, and I don't know if I ever will be, but I'm getting better, and that's nice. My proudest achievement is learning my limits for sure. I figured out more easily as the time went whenever I'm being too ambitious and was able to check myself for that. And I also found out how passionate I am about choose your own adventure stories. And I hope to continue this story and many others in the future. And the website itself, mnc.dreamhosters.com. Those are my initials. I hope you enjoy the journey as much as I did. Thank you so much for listening to my project. I hope you enjoyed it.